Let's talk about Obsidian bases. Ever tried setting one up and just felt like it should be easier? You're not alone, trust me. The bases plugin is a beast, but the first steps can feel a bit overwhelming very quickly. But once it clicks, it completely changes how you organize everything. So in this video, I will show you how to create bases, how the different view types work, how to use formulas without confusion, and where to find practical templates that you can easily copy so you get a quick start into your bases setup. Since the Obsidian team released the bases plugin, I have rebuilt my entire production vault to replace DataView and DataView.js queries with bases wherever possible. I also use it across all the downloadable vaults I provide, including my CRM system, my travel planning vault, and the free Lean Starter vault. Everything I show you here comes from real working systems. If you're interested in those, you will find the links to them in the description. By the end of this video, you will be able to build your own bases, use different view types, and custom formulas. But before we jump into real examples, let's first understand a few basics about the bases and what we need to consider when we want to use our nodes and data with them. If it comes to understanding things on a fundamental or advanced level, I recommend taking a look at Skillshare, the sponsor of today's video. If you have watched more than one of my videos, which I hope you did, I hope you also noticed that I try to improve every single time. Recently, I took a class focused on shooting video with my phone, but using the Blackmagic camera app. This free app is more powerful than the built-in one, but this also means it is somewhat more complex. So I was happy to find Justin Brown's class on Skillshare. It covers everything one needs to get going and does so in an easy to understand way. Skillshare is of course packed with all kinds of classes on just about every creative topic you can imagine, from writing and painting to photography, productivity, and nowadays of course also AI. Are you still on the fence? Well, this might help. The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. So why not give it a try? Check out Skillshare today and learn something new. So here is the one thing to keep in mind before we start. Bases only sees what is in our node's front meta properties. If a property is not in the YAML block, Bases does not see it. This also means it does not work with inline tags inside our node content. Everything Bases works with must live in front meta, which is why consistency matters so much there. Keeping this in mind can save us much future headache. Using those properties, Bases lets us view and filter our data in different ways. We have tables, cards view, lists, and maps. And let me tell you why Bases is such a game changer. It's awesome for tracking information, planning, managing projects, organizing content, and building dashboards. For everyday workflows, it's much faster than DataView queries. To get started, all we need to do is enable the plugin. First, we go to Obsidian Settings, then Core Plugins, and activate the Bases plugin. That's it. There are no options to configure. Now, there are two ways to work with bases. A base can live in its own file as a standalone base, or we can write it directly as a code block inside a node. Both look the same and use the same syntax. The difference is context. When a base lives inside a node, that node becomes its reference point. In the syntax, that's called this. All queries run in that context. And when a base lives in its own file, the active node defines the context instead. Now, if that sounds a bit abstract right now, don't worry. Once you see this in action later, it will make perfect sense. Here are 3 simple rules that save you a lot of trouble later. Stick to simple, predictable names like status, type, date, location, or rating. Also, try to avoid spaces and inconsistent capitalization. Trust me, it will make it much easier for you to work with your properties. Now, assuming our data is all set up, what is the best way to actually see and work with it? This is where picking the right view type for each case becomes important. Let me show you how each view can be used for the different types of insights depending on what we need or want. Views are what can turn a base from just showing raw data into something actually useful. The same data can feel completely different depending on the view we choose. Do not underestimate how seeing the same information as a table, a card, or a map can totally change the outcome and the benefit of this data. Basis provides 4 different view types, and each one solves a different problem. The table view is exactly what it sounds like. It shows 1 row per node and 1 column per property. This is the best starting point when you are building a new base, checking data quality, or working with structured information like projects, tasks, or simple lists. Then there is the actual list view, which is more compact. Instead of columns, it shows the selected properties in line, separated by commas. This works well when you want a clean overview without the visual weight of a whole table. I use this very often in dashboards, for example. And we have the cards view, which is ideal for visual content. It shines when our notes include images like covers or thumbnails, such as books, recipes, collections, or mood boards. Cards make browsing and inspiration-driven workflows much more natural. And finally, the map view is for nodes that include location data. Basis uses those coordinates to place items on an interactive map. This view is perfect for travel planning, location-based research, or basically anything where geography matters. All of these views use the same underlying data. We can switch between them at any time without changing our nodes. Choosing the right view is often the difference between a base that feels kind of awkward and one that feels effortless and really provides value. We are going to configure and refine each of these views step by step when we walk through the practical use cases. You can of course follow along, or you can download the templates I use via the link in the description and explore them directly. Alright, enough theory. Let's make this real with something many people need: seeing our progress at a glance. Whether we are tracking habits, reading progress, or projects, here is how to build a live progress bar in Basis. Now, let's see all of this in practice with a real use case. One of the most common things people want to track is progress. How far am I? How much is left? Am I close to done or still far away? This is not just about effort. We can reuse it for reading progress, learning goals, projects, habits, or anything where we compare a current value to a target value. Our goal is to calculate and visualize progress based on a target value, let's call it estimated effort, and a current value, let's call that one current effort. We want to see progress both as a percentage and as an easy-to-read progress bar. This is the result we're going to build. We will do this step by step, and nothing here requires scripts or data view. To achieve this, I prepared some demo nodes with the required properties, estimated effort and current effort. This is the pattern: 1 target value, 1 current value, and both of them obviously are numeric. These values can represent anything: hours, points, pages, units of work. The important part is consistency. Every node uses the same property names and types, and both values use the same unit. Otherwise, a percentage calculation would not make sense. Now, we create a new base that pulls in these nodes. I will call it demo. We first set the filter to return only markdown files by defining file extension is MD for all views. And for the current view, we limit the results to nodes containing the tag rating demo. Of course, you need to adapt this for your own purpose. Then we right-click on the view name and call it progress bar 1. Next, we add the columns for our existing properties: file name, that's already there and also links to the node, estimated effort, and of course, current effort. At this point, the base already works. We can see the numbers for each node. But in some cases, raw numbers are not very helpful. What we want is to see progress. So we add a new formula column by clicking on Properties and Add Formula at the bottom of the list. We call it F percentage. I like to prefix all my formulas with the F character so I can easily find them in the list later. And we enter our formula. The logic here is very simple. We divide current effort by estimated effort and multiply the result by 100, and we also round it to 1 decimal. This gives us a numeric progress value for each node. Now we already have something a bit more useful. Next, we want to make this even easier to read by visualizing the percentage. So we add another formula called F progress bar 1. This time, we use the repeat function to show a specific symbol multiple times. In this case, we show a green square for the percentage progress value rounded to whole numbers and a gray square for the remaining value until 100%. This is relatively simple because the basis plugin allows us to reference existing formulas. In this case, we reference the previously created formula f% instead of having to recalculate everything again. And that results in a view like this one. We can sort by any column, including the progress bar itself. And here's the nice part. If we change a value directly in the table, the percentage and the progress bar update immediately. We do not even have to open the underlying node. And this kind of instant feedback is one of the reasons why Basis feels so much more responsive than other approaches or plugins. Next, let us build a simpler version of the same idea using just a single progress value. What if we already have a single progress number in our node? Basis can quickly turn that into a dynamic progress bar too. This is simpler than the previous approach. Instead of comparing two values, we assume that progress is already a number between 0 and 100, which also makes it a bit less flexible. In my demo nodes, I have one front meta property called progress. It is indeed a number from 0 to 100. This is what we are going to build based on this single property. We are going to use three formulas. One to normalize the value, one to display it as a text, and one to actually draw the progress bar. First, we go back to our demo base. Right-click on the view, then on the three dots, and click on Duplicate View. We then rename it to Progress Bar 2. We remove all the previous properties except the file name, of course, and instead add the property Progress. Now, we need to define the formulas for the missing values and, of course, for the progress bar. The first formula we create is called f_progress_pct for percentage. All it does is to normalize the value by dividing progress, or rather the value of the property progress, by 100. This turns a value like 35 into 0.35, for example. We are going to use that value for calculating the progress bar. Next, we create a more human-friendly representation. I will call this formula f_progress_txt for text. If the value is greater than 0, we multiply it by 100, round it, and add the percent sign. And finally, we draw the bar itself. That's also fairly simple. We create a 10-step bar. Each filled block represents 10% that are completed, and each empty block represents 10% for the remaining percentage until 100. So we repeat the filled block symbol based on the current progress, and then fill the rest with empty blocks. We also use the floor function to always round down the result of our calculation. This avoids showing a full bar when the value is close to, but not yet at, 100%. After all, we don't want to have 96% completion look like it's completely done. This gives us a clean progress bar that updates automatically based on the value in progress. And just like before, if we update the value directly in the table, the percentage and the bar update instantly and automatically too. This method is perfect when we already track progress as a single number. For example, for habit tracking, learning goals, or manual progress tracking in any other domain. In the next chapter, we will switch from numbers to visuals and look at how to use images with the cards view. So far, we have mainly used the table view, which is perfect for structured data and calculations. But sometimes we want something more visual, a way to browse a node collection like a gallery with images. This is where the cards view comes in handy. In this chapter, we are going to use recipes as an example, but the things I will show you work for anything that has an image. Book notes, films, trips, collections, or inspiration notes. Here is an example of a recipe space using the cards view. Each card shows an image and a few key properties from the node. Let me show you how to build that one. Let's look at one of the underlying nodes first. This recipe node has front meta properties such as difficulty, rating, last cooked, and total time. They also include a property called feature image, which contains the name of the image file we want to display. That image property is the key to making cards work visually. Now we are back in our demo base. I already created a view called recipes and filtered it to markdown files that contain the tag recipe. This filter is just for the demo. You can of course just as well filter by folders or any other property you wish. Now we add the recipe properties that we want to display on each card. In this case, I will go for difficulty, rating, last cooked, and total time. Next, we right-click on the view name and change the layout from table to cards. the base immediately switches to a card layout, but we still do not see any images. To fix that, we go down to the field Image Property and select the Feature Image property from the list. We can choose our preferred image fit. For me, it is cover, and adjust the aspect ratio. Just as with tables, we can still group, sort, and filter. For example, we can sort them by rating and group them by meal type to see quickly what we really like for each specific type. This allows us to create visually appealing views for any purpose. And we don't have to touch our data. We are only changing how it is presented. The same approach works for any nodes that have an image property. Now that we have seen tables and cards, let us look at something completely different. Using bases with maps for travel planning. Before using Obsidian, planning a trip, collecting information during the trip, and reviewing everything afterwards was scattered and fairly hard to manage, at least for me. So what I really wanted was a spatial overview. Trips, places, other locations, all connected and visible on a single map. So I built my own travel planner in Obsidian. You can actually download it via the link in the description if you like. And that is where the map view in Bases becomes extremely powerful. There are two map uses we are going to look at. First, an overview map that shows all the trips in our vault. And second, a contextual map that shows only the locations related to a specific trip. This is my overview map. Each marker represents one trip, and clicking on it takes me directly to the corresponding node. For example, my trip to Italy. Inside the Italy node, I have another map view. This one shows only the places related to this specific trip. There are cities I was visiting, like Verona, landmarks, restaurants, and museums. Again, each of these places has its own node. If we look at the front matter of a trip or a location node, the key properties for maps are: first, location, for the coordinates that the plugin needs to draw or show the marker on the map. Second, the icon, which tells the plugin exactly which icon to use for the specific node type. And third, the color, which gives the marker a specific color. Again, different colors for different types of locations. These properties are what Bases uses to place and style markers on the map. Back in the demo base, I created a new view called Trips and filtered it to markdown files in my travel folder. Of course, once again, instead of a path, you could use tags here. At first, this gives us a simple table. We right-click on the view name and change its layout to Maps. We can zoom, pan, and center the map to the region that makes sense for us. For me, that's Europe. If we right-click and hold on the map, we can also tilt and rotate the view. Once we're happy with it, we right-click on the map and click on Set Default Center Point, and right-click again to Set Default Zoom. This ensures that the map always opens with this view by default. We can also change these settings by right-clicking on the view name and opening the display options. Next, we configure the markers. We right-click on the view name, open the markers section, and pick the correct properties for each field. For me, that's location for the coordinates. And as soon as I pick it, you can see things happening on the map already. For marker icon, I pick the icon property. Again, the changes are visible right away. And for marker color, of course, the color property. Now we have a map with all our trips, landmarks, restaurants, and whatever else we are tracking in our travel folder. But we only want to see our trips here. As before, we go to the filter options and add a filter for nodes containing a tag like travel/trip. That's the one I'm using. And this cleans up the map rather nicely. Now let's look at the second scenario, contextual maps. As shown earlier, I have a node for my trip to Italy with a map showing all the locations I visited there. Each location node, again, has the same key properties: location, icon, and color, plus tags that describe what kind of place it is. In this case, it's a museum. Back in our demo base, I duplicate the trips view and rename it to trip context. This time, I modify the filter so it only shows nodes linked from the currently active trip node using the string this file has link file in brackets. Now, whenever I open a trip node, the map automatically updates to show only the locations related to that trip. That's pretty neat. By the way, we can also change the map background. If we right-click on the view and expand the background section, we can paste a URL to our preferred style. You can find these styles on the Obsidian website in the section for map views. The link is once again in the description for you. Currently, you can find there 3 URLs. Positron is a light background. Liberty looks like this, also light but with a bit more color, and dark does pretty much what you would expect. Each view in our base can have its own background, which gives us a lot of flexibility. The takeaway here is that maps are just another view on top of structured data. Once our nodes have consistent location properties, we can reuse this method far beyond traveling. We can track site visits or research locations, real estate locations, events we visited, or basically anything else tied to geography. Next, we will switch from locations to time and look at how bases helps us work with dates. Let's talk about dates and how we can work with them in bases. Working with dates can feel a little bit tricky, but it's actually quite simple once we know a few go-to formulas. Let me show you some quick wins. We are going to cover 4 things: how to work with today's date, how to extract a date from a file name, how to work with a dedicated date property in our node's front meta, and how to build relative views like today, yesterday, or this week, or last year. First, a few basics. We can get the current date by using the today function. The date format depends on our system's settings. If we add toString, bases returns the date in a consistent year, month, day format. And if we want a custom format, we can use format. For example, this lets us extract just the year and month of a specific date. Many of us work with daily nodes, and these nodes very often follow a naming pattern like year, dash, month, dash, day, sometimes followed by other text. We can turn this into a real date by taking the first 10 characters of the file name and passing them into the date function. If the file name matches this pattern, we get a valid date. If not, bases simply returns nothing. This allows us to build views like this day in history, showing nodes from previous years that share the same month and day as the title of our current node. For example, this is my daily node for January 7, 2026. All my daily nodes have the same structure based on a template, and this includes exactly such a view for this day in history. Next to the daily node, we have the base that I use to get this view. All we need to do is to filter for files where the file name contains the current node's date based on its file name, formatted as month, dash, day. This ignores the year and returns all nodes created on that specific day. But what do we do with nodes that do not have the date in the name? Well, we have 2 options. We can either use the file system's created timestamp, or we can define a dedicated property for a node's creation time. Personally, I prefer the latter, because sync tools and backups, or restoring backups, could change the file system's values, and then our queries do not return the correct results anymore. So, the next examples and tips with our bases will all use a front meta property called created, which is present in all my nodes. If you don't have that, you can always replace it with the system property created time. Otherwise, the formulas work exactly the same way. Using a dedicated date property makes relative views very easy. For example, we can get a list of all nodes created today. How is this different from this day in history? Well, it always considers today's date, so the current date, instead of the date in the current node's file name. Let me show you to make it a bit clearer. We are back in our demo base, and I have a view called created today, which currently gives me a list of all markdown files returning their name and the value from the front meta property created. We can now add a new formula. I will call it f created today. All we do here is to format today's date to match the property's date format and then compare it to the created property in the node. Now, we can filter for nodes where f created today is true. If we instead want nodes created yesterday, we follow the same principle. We create a new formula property called f created previous day, adapt our formula to deduct one day from today's date, and set the filter to only show results where this specific field is true. As you can see, the basic principle remains the same, and it's fairly simple to adapt to different scenarios. For getting a list of all the nodes created on the same day as the currently active node, this is not related to the node's file name, but to the created date in the node, we once again create a new formula property. Let's call it f created same day, and filter for nodes where that field is true. We can then embed this view or move the file to the side panel. Whenever we open a node, it will update and show all other nodes that were created on the same day as the currently selected one. I think you get the idea. And if this seems like a lot to remember, don't worry. I keep all of these snippets and many more on my wiki, the link to which is in the description for you. This also includes patterns or methods that I'm not showing here today, like the similar views for the current month, previous month, or year-based views. You can all find them there, and it will help you to get started much faster. Birthdays, deadlines, anniversaries, whatever the date, it's easy to let them slip. Well, for me it's very easy. I constantly forget them. Here is how to build a tracker that not only counts down to these days, but also auto-calculates ages or any other duration for anything that matters to you. In this chapter, we are going to build a birthday tracker that does two things. One, it shows how many days are left until the next birthday of this person. And two, it calculates the person's current age automatically. The same method, of course, works for deadlines, anniversaries, renewals of subscriptions, or any other recurring date. I already created a view called Birthday Tracker. It filters for markdown files with the tag person, where the property birthday is not empty. So once again, I need to make sure that my nodes are properly organized. They need to have the tag person, and they need to have the property birthday. I want to have enough time to find a present, so I add a new formula property called f remaining days and use this formula. Now, this might look confusing, but all it really does is to convert today's date and the person's birthday into a number. Then it calculates the difference and returns the result. And because we are lazy, we don't want to calculate the person's age ourselves. So we add another formula property called fh and use this formula, which only checks if the birthday is in the past and then uses the correct calculation to display the person's current age. As mentioned, we are not limited to birthdays or durations in years. We can use the same approach to count days until a deadline, track contract renewals, calculate how long something has existed, or simply show how much time is left until an important event. We can also calculate the days, weeks, or months until we can finally go on vacation again, assuming, of course, we plan our trips in Obsidian. But whether you use Obsidian as a travel planner or not, I'm pretty sure you have notes on books, films, recipes, or similar items that include a numeric rating. For example, from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. Next, we are going to look at how to turn numeric ratings from our notes into clear visual signals, of course, by using bases. Let's talk about ratings. If you are like me, you've got ratings sprinkled everywhere. Books, recipes, travel notes, whatever. With bases, we can turn those plain numbers into quick, visual cues which we can scan at a glance. Using icons directly in a property, like here in rating, looks nice, but numeric ratings, like in my rating, are usually the better choice. They are easier to sort, filter, and use in calculations. Question is, how do we keep the data numeric and still get a nice visual result? You probably guessed it. Bases formulas are good for that too. I created a few called visual ratings and filtered to markdown files containing the tag rating demo. By default, this returns just the file name. So let's add the property my rating to this table. And we can see that these are numbers ranging from 0 to 11. I will show you two different visualizations. One based on emojis and another one based on icons. I will also explain what the difference is. Let's begin by adding a new formula property called fVisualRating1. This formula uses a series of if statements. It checks whether my rating is greater than or equal to certain values and then returns the corresponding set of emojis. At the end, it also appends the numeric value. If we don't want that, we can simply remove that part that adds my rating at the end of each statement. Once this formula is in place, we no longer need to show the raw my rating column in the table, so I can remove that and make it a bit cleaner. Of course, we could replace the stars and dots that I'm using here with any other emojis that we prefer. For the second version, we create another formula property called fVisualRating2 and use this specific formula. The logic is kind of similar, but instead of emojis, we use Lucite icons. This gives us more control over the visual style and keeps everything consistent with Obsidian's icon set. If you're not familiar with these icons, you can use the link in the description to their website. It's a great resource, and every icon you find there should work in Obsidian. We simply search for a term like star, pick the one we like, and click on the icon's name. This copies it to our clipboard, and then we can paste it in our formula. The important thing here is that we keep our ratings numeric for clean data and flexibility, and also add visualizations through formulas instead of using emojis directly in our properties. And yes, these visual ratings also work perfectly in the cards view. In the next chapter, we're going to look at another visual trick, automatically using the first image in a node as its card cover. So far, we used a dedicated image property to show thumbnails in the cards view. But manually adding an image property to every node? That sounds like a lot of work. This next method removes that friction. I will show you how to automatically use the first image in any node as your card cover, with zero extra setup required. As before, I start with a simple view filtered to my demo nodes. At this point, we only see the file names. Now, we add a new formula property called fFirstImage. This formula scans the node for embedded files and checks whether they match common image types. Here, I define the types I wanted to look for, and you can adjust those, of course. If it does find images, it returns the name of the first one. Don't get confused by the 0. We have to use that because the index starts at 0, so the first image is actually referenced to with 0. Now we can see the image names in our table view. If we now switch the layout to cards and select fFirstImage as the image property, we immediately see the first embedded image in each node becoming the card's cover. I think that's a very nice solution for nodes where images already exist in the content, but we don't maintain it as a dedicated property. These are usually things like articles with screenshots that you may have clipped with the web clipper, or travel notes with photos, or reference notes with diagrams. Can be anything really. This keeps our nodes clean, avoids duplicating metadata, and still gives us a rich visual overview. How do you like it? In the next chapter, we're going to look at how to use bases as a dynamic map of content, or content map, that automatically adapts to the current folder. You don't want to miss that one. Alright, last use case before we move on to a bunch of quick tips. Many of us use maps of content, or MOCs, to navigate our vault. One problem is that manual content maps are very hard to maintain. Nodes change, folders grow, and links quickly go out of sync. We can of course use plugins like Waypoint or dataview to help us, but each of those has its own limitations. Waypoint, for example, is not easily customizable, and dataview can become very slow if you have more nodes in the result. Additionally, if we wanted to modify our content maps, we would have to touch each of them individually. Bases, on the other hand, gives us a faster and more flexible alternative. So let me show you how you can use Bases for a better, faster, and dynamic content map that you can reuse in every folder and maintain with very little effort. For the last time, I created a new view called Dynamic MOC. By default, this filters only for Markdown files in my whole vault. So we click on Filter and switch to Advanced Filter. Here, we insert this formula, which uses the context of this. Remember, I mentioned this in the very beginning. In other words, the base adapts automatically depending on which node is active. Now, we can, for example, embed this base in any other node. When we place it inside a folder node, it automatically lists all nodes in that folder. The same base file works everywhere. We do not need to duplicate anything, and implementing changes can be done in a single place. For example, in my folder Obsidian Tweaks. As you can see, the content is indeed that of the current folder, so we have a truly dynamic content map. Alternatively, we can drag the base file into the side panel. In that position, it always shows the nodes that belong to the same folder as the currently active one. Now this gives us a truly dynamic map of content. There are no manual updates, no duplicated queries, and instant context switching. And this method is not limited to folders. We can use the same idea for tags, project contexts, or any situation where this defines the scope. Before we finish, there are a handful of quick tips that can save you hours and make your Bases workflow feel truly polished. So let's go through them together. Before we finish, I want to share a set of quick tips and best practices, or at least good practices. None of these are required to work with bases, but together they make working with them faster, cleaner, and frankly, more enjoyable. The first tip is one that you may have noticed already in this video. When embedding a base in a node, you may not always want to see the header and toolbar. This is especially useful for dashboards and compact overviews, for example. If I switch to source mode, we can see that the only difference is the addition of pipe character, so this long vertical line, and no header at the second embedded base. For this to work, we need to create a CSS snippet. Don't worry if you've never done this before, it's super simple. Look at a few steps. We go to Settings, Appearance, and scroll down to Snippets. We click on the folder icon, and this opens the location of CSS snippets for this specific vault. In here, we create a new file. Let's call it bases noheader.css. Make sure it has the extension .css. Then we simply paste this code into it and save it. Once again, you don't have to type this code. You can find it on my wiki via the link in the description. Back in Obsidian, we refresh the snippet list and activate the one we just created. And now we can embed our base, define the view we want, and add pipe no header to get only the results without the toolbar, as you can see here in this example. Next up, summarizations. Bases allows us to summarize numeric columns. We can right-click on a column header, choose Summarize, and pick an operation. The result for each operation is conveniently displayed next to it. For example, let us calculate the average of the current effort column. By default, blank values are still included in the average calculation. Now, if we want to ignore blanks, we can create a custom summary formula by clicking on Add Summary and pasting this formula. This creates a sum of all the values in the column and then divides the sum by the number of elements that are not blank or, as it is stated in the formula, not null. Now, this is very useful when blank values should not affect averages, of course. When embedding a base in another node, Obsidian shows the default view by, well, default. If we want a specific view instead, we can reference it directly by adding #viewName to the base file name. This works the same way as referencing a heading in an embedded node, so you might be familiar with that already. This makes it very easy to embed multiple views from the same base in different places. Okay, so this is how we can embed a base with a specific view, but how can we actually change the default view itself? Well, it's easy. We simply click on the current view's name, then we get a list of all the available views, hover over the icon of one of these views, and then drag it to the top of the list. The first view in the list is always the default view for a base. Oh, speaking of views, to edit one or to configure it, we can click on the views drop-down arrow, and then on the little arrow next to the view's name. So that's 2 clicks on small targets. Or, and this is much faster, we can simply right-click on the view name itself and come to the same result, but much faster. And since we are here already, this is also where we can change a table view's row height. We have the choice between short, medium, tall, and extra tall. That's really helpful because Bases does not yet support dynamic row heights based on content. And if our columns don't fit well, we can either drag their borders or simply double-click on them to auto-fit the content width. By the way, did you know that the result count shown in the view header is interactive? If we click on it, we can limit the number of results. Combined with the sorting functionality, this is perfect for creating top or bottom n views, like the top 3 of something or the bottom 5 of something else. And from the same menu, we can export the current view as a CSV file, which is nice, or we copy it directly to the clipboard as a static table. This is great for taking snapshots or sharing data outside of Obsidian. Now, these are all fairly small details, but they add up quickly. And once you start using Bases daily, they make a noticeable difference in speed and usability. And just before we wrap this all up, let's clarify a few common questions and misunderstandings that come up again and again when people start using Bases. These are things you will likely run into sooner or later, so it makes sense to address them directly, since we're here anyway. One of the most common questions I have seen online regarding Bases is whether they can work with so-called inline fields. If you're not familiar with those, the idea is that you can write your node text, and somewhere inside the text, you have a field name called field, And to identify it as a field rather than text, you add 2 colons. Now, this is something that became very popular with people who are using dataview because dataview actually supports this. Does basis support it as well? Well, the short answer is no, it doesn't. Inline fields are really just a feature of the dataview plugin. Bases do not read them at all. From everything I've seen online, also from the Obsidian team, this is not going to change. Basis is intentionally built around front meta properties only. This keeps things simpler and also is one of the reasons why it's much faster than dataview. But it also means that anything that is currently stored inline, in inline fields, will be ignored by bases. The recommended approach is, of course, to move all those values from inline fields to front meta properties. To make that easier, and if you want to keep your inline fields as well, there is a plugin that you can use. It is called dataview-properties. This copies the dataview inline fields and their values into the front meta properties, and also keeps them synchronized automatically. You can find the link to that plugin in the description, of course. Fair warning here, as with any tool or plugin that modifies nodes or their metadata in bulk, it's a great idea to make a backup of our vault before we use it and give it a try. This is simply good practice. Personally, I have not used the plugin myself yet, so I can't really tell you how well it works, but I wanted you to be aware of it. Also, if you want to ensure that you won't lose any of your nodes and bases, take a look at this video where I explain how to set up a comprehensive, free and automated 3-to-1 backup system. I also demonstrate and explain several free methods for synchronizing your vault between devices. Personally, I use the Obsidian Sync, but I understand that some people don't want to use it, others can't afford to use it, so it's nice to have alternatives. Overall, I really think you're going to find that video very useful. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching and see you next time.